this computer. All right, we're recording. Live on Facebook.
Jumping off. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Zach.
All right, I'll leave you to it too, Charlie.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Cool. If we start right on noon, it'll be a miracle. All righty. Just setting the caption just really quick. Rick, is it possible, make sure I'm not muted, to turn on your camera, or are we going to just roll with the audio?
I don't have a lot of bandwidth, so it kind of distorts my signal when I go with audio, video.
Okay, totally understand. Just thought I'd ask. All right, I'm hitting the go live button, so in about 5 seconds, I'm sure it'll tell us when we're live. All righty. Welcome everyone to our fire panel here today. This is our first episode of fire and holistic wellness. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, and I'm excited and honored to be in the space and presence of some fire leaders in our local community. I think we're going to have a pretty informative and fun and energetic kind of conversation. So I appreciate you all spending your Friday lunchtime here with us today. Before we get into the introductions of our panelists here, I just wanted to kind of welcome everyone to this series. I think it's really important. I think that us as local Indigenous people understand that, you know, our mental health and our holistic health depends on our environmental health. And so having these spaces kind of raises awareness and promotes like these efforts to kind of restore balance in the world. So welcome for that. And some of you probably have been exposed to some of these teachings. Some of us may be new to the idea. So we're very welcome and open to wherever you may be in that journey of reclaiming, you know, healthy relationships to fire. So that's what I like about these spaces, is just how open it could be and how we're all on different scales. You know, myself, I'm still learning very much and learning from all these folks here today. Some of them I'm really close with, some of them have been family friends for a long time, and some of them have been new. And in any way that relationship may be, I think is something I'm looking forward to, like the diverse perspectives and similar perspectives. And I do want to kind of give you guys a little bit of a backstory to how this fire response came into fruition here at Two Feathers. As we all know, we kind of experienced a lot of catastrophic fires this last year, but for hundreds of years since kind of the demonization of kind of fire on the land and the mismanagement by many agencies. And so kind of how I personally was like, we gotta do something, and I'm not necessarily in my homelands to do something on the ground, but I knew that Two Feathers kind of has a platform to kind of spread awareness and uplift the voices who have been doing a lot of this important work for a long time now. And so we got we started off with kind of doing some immediate responses to some of the families who were impacted by the Slater fire in particular, just offering resources and support, just kind of as a reactive approach. And I've always been taught that reactive approach is just a little bit too late, and so I wanted to kind of create some infrastructure to start thinking future and kind of prevent some of these things. And knowing that some programs and efforts such as the WKRP, the Western Klamath Partnership Project, I might have butchered that, but those projects have been going for some time now. And I think it's perfect way to kind of kick off our series today is to have some of those leaders here kind of talk about who they are and what kind of got like what their coming to story was, kind of getting to this point. And so that'll be our first kind of introduction question. So welcome. And I'm going to start off with Will here just because he's first on my screen. So I would like it if you guys would kind of introduce who you are and just kind of your coming to story of how you got into this type of work. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much for the invite, Charlie. Yeah, I guess fire kind of came to me. My first memories are of a burnout during the 77 hog fire and forks of salmon behind the cabin I was born in up there on the Salmon River. And, the 77 hog fire kind of marked the beginning of a new era of wildfires in our country, as we came out of one of the wettest centuries in the last 5,000 years into one of the driest. And it's really shown us the folly of trying to manage fire ignitions through a fire suppression model versus managing fuels and resources through a fuels management model like the tribes have successfully used for thousands of years here. So, really for me, it was, 10 years later in the 87 fire, it burned so hot in the North Fork of the Salmon River that about 6 feet of topsoil washed off the mountain into the river. And all of a sudden the salmon were dying because the holes weren't deep enough. And, I realized that, if we didn't fix our fire problem, we were going to lose our spring salmon. And so that's kind of what brought me to fire was, I think it's the root cause that if we fix our relationship to fire, it'll have all these other beneficial effects.
Exactly. I think, we're talking about the impacts of, us people's mental health with that relationship to fire, but even more so with, the natural world and our, more than human relatives. And, a lot of times you don't really think, oh, well, fisheries management is probably in-stream, but really it's like that upstream slope type of management that could be just as effective to take care of. So I really like that interconnectedness that you kind of talked about. And I think that segues into some later talking points. And I'd like to offer Margo an opportunity to kind of take us through her story and hear from her. You're muted. First, I don't know if it's me, but I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
There you go.
Okay. My name's Margo Robbins. I come from the traditional village of Morick along the lower Klamath River. I became involved with fire around 9 years ago when I was getting ready to be a grandma for the first time. My daughter was pregnant with twins, and I was determined that they would be carried in traditional baby baskets. And in order to make one of those baskets, you have to have hazel sticks. And in order to have the right kind of hazel sticks, which is the new shoots that grow up single stems, long and straight, they have to be burned. And we have been unable to burn for for any reason really for the past almost 100 years, when it was pretty much outlawed, criminalized. And so if people would start an unauthorized fire, you would face the penalty of going to prison. And I was not willing to do that, of course, but I was determined that my grandbabies would be carried in baby baskets. And so we started on this path of how do we reclaim our right to use fire? And I was part of a local organizing committee that was started as part of the healthy, Building Healthy Communities initiative. And so it was through there that we were able to be successful, partially successful in bringing fire back to the land. Our community rated fire as the #1 priority, that the art of basket weaving was dying out. Basket weavers needed basket weaving materials. And plus we is at great risk for wildfire because of all the brush that's on the land, because fire has been excluded for so long. And so we were worried that if there was a wildfire, our elders would not be able to escape. And so with those two goals in mind, we figured out a way to bring fire back. And the first way we did that was we got a hold of CAL FIRE and asked them if they would come do a burn for us. And they said, yeah, they would do that, but we would have to prepare the land to so that they could burn. And so community members volunteered and went out and cut fire lines around a traditional hazel gathering area. And we didn't, they just volunteered. I gave them deer meat sandwiches for lunch, and they was all happy with that. And so we all worked for about, a good part of the day, and some work had been done prior to that as well. And then CAL FIRE came, and they, in combination with the Yurok Tribe Wildland Fire, burnt our first area of hazel. And the whole community celebrated because we were going to have hazel again. And so as a basket weaver, that has been one of the driving forces for me to continue to make hazel available for all the basket weavers, not just me. We now have enough to share with our neighboring tribes, and that's really, really a good feeling. And so that's how I became involved with fire.
Super powerful. And I'm noticing theme, we're talking about preventative measures, kind of proactive approaches, but also like the productivity that comes from that, like restoring that relationship with fire, and knowing that kind of come from like my first grandbaby. Like, I'll be darned if I'm going to let this historical reason be the reason, the deciding factor, if we keep that tradition alive. And Will mentioned spring Chinook salmon's like integral with that fire management and basket weaving materials. Like, those are components that basically indicate, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing here? And so those are just a few of the themes that I'm just recognizing now. So I appreciate already just how kind of holistic this conversation is. And before we transition to our next question, I know that we have another panelist here who's tuning in from, I'm assuming, Yurok country, where his internet service is just enough for his voice to come through. So I'll pose this question, kind of your coming to story, to Rick O'Rourke, and looking forward to hearing your response with this.
Well, thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here. My first memories of traditional fire were a long time ago, riding up the road with Grandma, and then her seeing the fire department putting out the fires for the sticks and just being mad at them and saying, oh, those no good firemen, they should let it burn. And then, later on, burning around the Grandma and Grandpa's house for fuel protection, for fuel reductions and protection. I was about 12, and then kind of building up into that. And then recently Auntie Margo asked me if I would run the crew to put in fire lines, and I agreed to that. And then she asked if I wanted to do some burning, and how could I say no to that? And so that's about 8 years ago. That was the beginning of getting into the new generations of bringing back fire into our land to help sculpt it back into what it used to be, because we only have about 3% of our prairies left, and our water levels are super low. The animals, they're not even close to the numbers they used to be. But with the reintroduction of fire back into our landscape, we have been striving and moving forward into adding all of that back into our landscape with the removal of stems per acres, and reclaiming our water rights, and helping our hydrology and our food securities and our medicine plants, and just the safety of our community and our peoples. The list goes on and on and on, and the work that we're doing, I think, is pretty cutting edge for the old science that it really is.
Yeah, I love that. I love the kind of what I'm getting is like, your Auntie Margot here has kind of mentored you and kind of brought you, like, kind of bridged that, like rekindled that relationship for you. And so I think there's like, I like that about this panel is like, there's so many different perspectives and so many connections within all of us that, you're kind of really like holding on to that torch, so that way you're teaching the next generation, and Margot has done her due diligence and bringing you right along, and so there's that interconnectedness of like personal
Oh,
relationships around it.
absolutely. And I've worked for years with Will Harling too, so we're, like this big family that's, helping to fix all of our lands, not just Yurok, but Karuk and Hupa, and, any other peoples who wants to come in and learn and participate. And, we put in a lot of hard work, but we have a lot of good fun too.
Oh yeah, that's what keeps it sustainable, is just that connection and relationship to each other. Like how many good memories I'm sure come from brushing or burning the process. So that's really powerful. And yeah,
It
so
is. It's magic, bro. It's magic.
go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's magic, just the good feelings and the sense of accomplishment as we move along and move forward and creating our trust relationships, not just with each other, but with, state, federal, local agencies, and seeing that blossom into something that's going to be amazing and actually very beneficial to all of us, native and non-native.
Wow, that's perfect point, because obviously we live in a world where we gotta work with each other, we can't continue to be like, oh, us versus them, because it's very much like we all deserve, a fair chance at this life and a sustainable lifestyle, and having that idea that living that life is what's going to get us through it all. It's not going to help putting each other down, and coming together and being united is only going to help us in the long term, and everything that comes with it. And so I think that, that kind of comes in, that's like a natural transition into our second question. So the second question is basically kind of another opportunity to talk about, like, inspiration, about like who or like what inspired you to get involved with fire. Like, I've heard a lot of experiences. I've heard, some family members kind of influencing that. So I just wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper, and maybe there's some things that kind of come up for Will, just having heard, the rest of the panelists here. Maybe like you wanted to kind of dive a little deeper as far as like what inspired you, who inspired you.
Yeah, I'll never forget the day I hitched a ride over the mountain from Etna High School because there was a special meeting with the California Department of Fish and Game. The locals were up in arms because the runs were dwindling, and they put in a fishing weir, to count the fish, but the fish were getting kegged up behind the weir and were getting eaten by otters and poachers, and so we were kind of ready to rebel. And I'll never forget that day. Lee Philman came, a much younger Lee Philman than he is now, came upriver and gave this talk about holistic management. and how, you know, there's another way to look at managing resources. And ever since that time, I think I was like a sophomore or junior in high school, I was like, that makes sense, right? All the stuff I've been seeing so far doesn't make sense to me. And, you know, luckily growing up with Bill Tripp and others, you know, and then, you know, meeting Ron Reed and others upriver who, you know, really kind of help open my eyes to, you know, long-term traditional management and all the things that type of management gets us, you know, and, you know, just to understand that there was a whole nother set of laws to living in this place that I had never been taught. And the more I learned about that other set of oral tradition, that those laws that govern what it meant to be a good person in this place, it all made sense to me, you know. And so that's kind of, for me, I realized, you know, hey, this is an opportunity for us to stop taking and to start giving again, you know. And the reality is our local tribes give so much to our native and non-native, you know, members of our community, you know, from healthcare to jobs to, you know, so much stuff. And so, you know, really, I think it's been an example for me of like, hey, you know, I need to, you know, be an ally. And, you know, because, you know, we don't own land here. You know, what we own is a responsibility to this land. And so, you know, it's, you know, assuming that responsibility and working from that viewpoint, I think has helped really change my life and give me a reason for living and doing what we do.
Super strong words there, Will. And, you know, I think that's what I'm hearing is, you know, the importance of local knowledge and understanding that, you know, this Western management, you know, even though there's kind of a grand hope that you're going to get to a point where there is like some type of sustainability, it's like we kind of got to make sure we're checking in with the people who have successfully lived in an optimal kind of lifestyle for tens of thousands of years, you know. So, you know, understanding like that is a responsibility, whether you're from here in that way or not, you know, and just kind of owning up to that and kind of coming face to face with that instead of kind of like fearful, you know. And I think that's why these conversations, these spaces and opportunities are important, because, you know, a lot of people can just, it's easier to kind of just go with the flow, you know, and it's not easy work, but, you know, it's rewarding in the long term. So thank you for kind of taking us through that experience that, you know, I think is important for a lot of viewers tuning in right now. And so I'll go ahead and transition over to Margo and just kind of keep the same kind of cycle of flow. So if you had anything else to add, Margo.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, my grandchildren or you know, really inspired me to get involved. And a couple of other people were really big inspirations as well. One of them was Tom Wilson. He was a co-founder of the Cultural Fire Management Council, and he's the one that really had the vision, you know, of what we needed to do with fire. We needed to do way more than just burn these small areas here and there. We needed to take care of our whole ancestral territory with fire, which is 5 million acres, and that restoring that land means restoration of the people. And, you know, our people are, a lot of them are in really dire straits. Our young people have lost their connection with the land. They don't really know really who they are as Native people. And so we came to realize as we began working with fire on the land that fire has that ability to reconnect people to the land and to reconnect them with the spirits that live on the land and to make us healthy again, physically and spiritually. And so it is that need of our community that continues to drive us forward to, no matter, you know, what the obstacles are, we're never going to say no. We're always going to move forward. And when we first started out, we didn't really know how to move forward. And I have to say that Will, you have been the biggest inspiration to us in teaching us how it is that, you know, because you guys were burning for several years before we started. And I remember that second, that after that first burn, and we was trying to figure out how to increase the size. And I was driving home, and all of a sudden I see all of these truck after fire truck coming across the Martins Ferry Bridge. And I'm like, well, where are those guys going? And so I stopped that fire truck, and I'm like, where are you guys going? And they're like, we're going up to Orleans, Mid-Klamath Watershed's having a treks. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to tie into this. And so it like opened a way for us to, get on that path to start accomplishing the dream, to move forward, to up the scale. And so, yeah, numerous inspirations.
Yeah, mutual inspiration. I have to say, I have been so inspired by, downriver, your guys' tenacity to just start from scratch, and to build what you've built in such a short amount of time. It's incredible. And, I think when we look at, cost per acre burned on the ground, you guys are far out in the lead. We have all these trucks and tankers and hose and do everything by the book. But, the reality is that, that local community connection to fire is at the root of what we do. And you guys have really showed us how that can work.
Right. Well, for a long time, we all just volunteered because, we didn't have money, but we're going to make it happen. And I don't know how many years did we volunteer, Rick? 5, 6, 7 years before we finally, got a grant and got to get paid. But you just do what you got to do, and you don't take no for an answer.
That's right. We just keep going.
I love it. There's that balance of organization, but then at the end of the day, it's like, you just got to kind of get out there and do it, and it's not that we don't know the traditional ways to kind of make sure it doesn't lead into a catastrophic event. We know what we have to do. It's just a matter of doing it, rallying the troops to get us in a position to where it'll be effective, starting with those important relatives, whether it's basket weaving, whether it's, upslope riparian areas, or whatever your kind of priority is in that space. I really appreciate that. And I'm not sure if I cut Rick off, but I just wanted to grant this chance to make sure he talks about kind of his coming to again and dive a little deeper this time.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, there's been so many people that inspire me. Margo for the beginning, and Will and Bill Tripp, and Jeremy Bailey with Trex, and all the training companies that we had come in from in my very first times with the I guess fire regime type, instead of just doing it down with Grandpa down to the house. But I spent a lot of time really studying fire and my relationship with fire, and trying to learn as much about fire as I can, and its characteristics, and how to predict its behavior, because ultimately, as we move forward and keep putting fire on the ground, we want to keep it where we want it inside of our lines, so we don't get a blemish. So as learning to predict the fire behavior and looking at our preps and saying to myself, what's the worst that could happen here? And if that was not an acceptable risk, then we do more work until we get to the point to where, when I say what's the worst that can happen here, that's an acceptable risk, and we're willing to go ahead and pull the trigger and put fire on the ground, so that we don't, have a mistake. Fire as a keystone element has a right to exist. And in our world and in our land, it's a keystone element for sure, as much as we are a keystone species to interact and shape our environments to keep it as healthy and prosperous as possible, to be respectful to our creator, to hold up our agreement to be on the land that we're on, is to tend it and to keep it beautiful and to keep it healthy, so that we can have all the foods we need and the medicines we need and the animals we need and the fish and the water as clean and pure as we can, And all that means that our people will be clean and pure, and that our spirits will be strong and healthy, and that our teachings can be handed on. Because I've sat underneath trees out where I'm working and just think to myself, how many hundreds and hundreds of years of knowledge and stories have been passed on right in this single spot where this tree is, you know, and looking in the past is helping me to see what I'm trying to shape in the future, if that makes sense, to try to make it what it once was and not turning it into something that it wasn't. And I know that this is a job that's way past my years, but hopefully, you know, somebody or more, a whole bunch of somebody's will pick it up and like feel like I do about fire and the relationships that we have with fire and the honor and respect that it deserves in our landscape with our people. You know, I love my people. I love the job that I'm doing. It does give me a lot of pride and a lot of sense of accomplishment, but I don't want to try to get too big. I just want to stay small in my picture and just do my role, and that's good enough for me.
Right on. That's awesome.
You
Were you
know,
gonna-
oh,
Go.
sorry.
You're good.
I just wanted to add to that, you know, fire in itself is what draws you to it. That's the inspiration, the biggest or one of the biggest inspirations of all, that when you experience fire on the land, it's like an addiction. It's like there's nothing more exciting. It's just like it speaks to your soul and it connects you to so much things. And once you start working with fire, that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you mentioned that. Like, it is addiction, and you know, especially when we're talking about social health and wellness, it's like when you get like a form, like, you know, such a big part of who you are as like as a healthy people taken from you, such as like fire management as a tool, then you still have that gene almost to like, you got to grab something, like something has to cling on. And you know, with the conditions that our people had been put through, it's like unhealthy things were right there in front of them to cling on to. And that's when you kind of go the other way with that. It should be a good thing that you have that addictiveness, that desire to do something regularly, routinely. But when that's kind of substituted with, you know, substances or, you know, drugs and all the alcohol, like that's when it can be really detrimental to the community, to the place. So, you know, that's important to kind of remember, like, hey, we could get back to use this addiction to a healthy and more sustainable kind of lifestyle. And so I want to just highlight what you're saying there, Margo. And that kind of naturally segues into, you know, like the disruption, you know, the disruption of traditional burning practices. And how many, from your guys' individual experiences, how has that disruption in practices been for your personal experience? And I'll go back to Will, because I believe we just finished with Rick there.
Yeah, you know, that reading a master's thesis from HSU called Forgotten Fires that Kathy McCovey turned me on to really just blew my mind, because it's all written down. The story of how they took fire away from the people on the rivers, that story is all there for people to see. You know, when the Forest Service formed in the early part of the 20th century, you know, in 1911 with the Weeks Act that banned all fires, you know, there was a letter a few years after that came into being in 1917 from the Orleans District Ranger that basically said, you know, Indians are of the pure cussed class of fire starter. Whenever you see them sneaking about in the brush lighting fires, take a shot at them. You know, fast forward 30 or 40 years, and what they called the incendiary problem didn't go away, because, you know, clearly people relied on fire for the resources to live. And so people, the rates of incendiarism, as they call it, were 17 times higher along the Klamath River corridor than any other place in California. So that gives you a link to the persistence of people here. You know, at the point of the gun, they were unwilling to give up fire. And so, you know, similarly, in both of those letters, what they suggested was hiring these field matrons to come in to the community and, without telling people, unbeknownst to the local people, try and convince, you know, the women, because the women were the matriarchs, that burning was bad and against their, you know, their best wishes, you know. And so there were so many underhanded things that have gone on all along in you know, taking fire out of the landscape. And it goes, you know, to this very day, where, you know, in fire suppression, you don't have to do any permitting. You can do anything and not be held liable. When we do prescribed fire or cultural fire, you own that fire and you can get sued. They can take your house. They can, you know, it's all the cards are stacked against you. You got to have environmental compliance, you know, and so everything is stacked against, you know, traditional burning practices. But what I will say is, you know, and Margo mentioned this too, you know, CAL FIRE and some people in the Forest Service are coming to the table because they realize that fire suppression is a failed endeavor. You know, that's where the Slater fire came from. That's where these huge fires that are burning down our communities happen, because, you know, we chose the wrong path over 100 years ago, and now we're 120 years down that path, and, you know, the error of our ways is becoming very evident. And so I think that's where, luckily, you know, Margo and Bill and others Kathy McCovey have carried that knowledge of what good fire is. And they can, you know, now that the state and federal organizations, agencies are ready to hear that knowledge, it's a unique moment in history for us to deliver that message. And I was super excited to be part of this paper that just came out entitled Good Fire, that, you know, Margo and Bill and Don Hankins and many others throughout the state, the leading minds in fire. And it's not just Native people, you know, farmers and ranchers are also behind it, you know, people that understand what the benefits are from getting fire back on the land are supporting this plan, which is basically, you know, how we change the laws and how we allocate resources to restore cultural fire in California.
Thank you, Will, for, you know, going through that kind of the history about it and also offering some resources. You know, I think that's important because, you know, this space is important to start the conversation, and then it's like kind of up to the audience to kind of do their research and kind of get in the habit of kind of bringing those voices up from the community and learning and tapping into that. So I think that's a big part of like this narrative. And, you know, so I really appreciate, you know, that the fluidity that you had in that conversation of like, I'm gonna, you know, give the proper recognition where it's due, and also like take them through like a historical kind of process. And it's exactly what we're trying to get at with this part. And so I offered Margo the same type of opportunity as far as the disruption and how it come to be. You're muted.
Thank you for that narrative on the Forest Service policy, Will. I really appreciate that. I remember reading that story. You know, the theft of fire from the people, I feel like, was another purposeful act of genocide against Native people. Our culture is fire dependent, and there was an outright onslaught against us as Native people. They were trying to whitewash us and to take everything away from us that makes us Indian. And I think that this was another piece of that, a part of, because our food sources depend on fire, our baskets depend on fire, our medicine plants, all of these things that we as Native people use depend on fire. And so when they take that right away from us to use it, it's another direct attack on us as Native people and our cultural lifeways. In the beginning times when the Wage spirit beings was here, before humans was here, one of the things that they did is that they decided that they needed fire. They needed a way to cook their food and to keep them warm and for light. And they went up into the sky and stole fire from the old ladies up there that kept it. And they brought it here to Earth. And the way that they did it is they passed it from one animal to the next. There was deer and bear and mountain lion, the turtle, all these different kinds of animals took a turn. The fire went from one to the next until finally it ended up with Frog, who took it into his mouth and went under the water. And then finally the old ladies that was chasing them went away. And so when the humans came, those pre-human race of spirit beings, Wage taught us how to use fire. And there was an original agreement that Rick mentioned earlier about how we would use fire to take care of the world around us physically and spiritually. And so when the government agencies took our ability away to use fire, then we were unable to carry out that agreement. But now that we are in the process of bringing back fire, and you look around at these training exchange events, and we have all these different firefighters from all these different organizations. There's people from Forest Service and even CAL FIRE and private organizations and tribes, you know, and in a way we're kind of like those original animals that stole fire, except we are stealing it back from the government agencies and not the people from the sky.
That was beautiful. I love the, you know, the reality of the situation is like, you know, they took fire away from it to control the narrative, to control, like to have power and control. And it's nothing new, you know. I feel like there's a sense of like teaching and like, hey, you got to do what you got to do to make sure that you're protecting the flame, you know, protecting it. And that's like embedded in our stories, where as long as those stories exist, we'll remember, and at some point we'll get the courage and, you know, push to make sure that we do whatever we have to do to make sure that we keep that flame going. And so that was a really beautiful story there. And I'll offer Rick the space to kind of try and see if he could top that one.
It's pretty hard to top Auntie. She's pretty good. Well, to me, the removal of fire, just like Auntie said, it's another form of genocide, because, you know, if we don't burn this year, we don't eat next year. Basically what it boils down to. And back to the way it was, you know, thousands of years ago, that's exactly how it was. If we don't burn this year, we don't eat next year. Think about that. You know, we don't got a store to go to. We don't got an outpost. What we have is what's there. And we've learned to live with that. And we've learned to maintain and support its, you know, positive outcome of our foods and our balances and our health and our well-being. Not to mention, you know, the keeping the water so clean, you know. As that water comes in, and right now it's drained through 2 feet of oak leaf before it gets to the ground. And with that draining through there, it's picking up all those tannins, and it's putting those tannins into our earth and then washing it into our streams. It's raising our alkali levels so that it's a breeding ground for bacteria. And that's pretty much where we're at all the way up and down the river and all of our creeks and tributaries. As we start removing those leaves and turning it into ash to fix that pH level, to neutralize our soils, it's going to make them healthier. And removing the stems per acres up there on those mountains that has grown in the last 100 years. Almost every tree you see out there is an encroachment tree, you know, and they're allowed to be there because of no fire and the removal of species, porcupines, for instance. You know, the little furs that's a main source of their sustenance. And just switching off that balance and just removing, you know, a couple of key articles of nature just shifts our balance all around so bad. And then, shooting us, that kind of helps stop fire too. But, we're getting to the point where it's in such a negative area for fire that one spark, and there goes a million acres, and then on the other hand, they won't let us tend it with fire. And, so I'm not really sure which way is right, which way is wrong. But as we start going and building these, like I said before, these relationships that we are with all of these different agencies of government and non-government, it's just positive. And our community response to what we're doing is amazing. They're so supportive and so behind what we're doing that, it's really, that's an inspiration there too, the community put so much trust into me to allow me to go through and do these treatments that I owe it to them to like extra work super hard so that I don't do something bad, because this is our people and our places and our land, and this is our time. This is our time, let's do it right. And all the help we can get from Two Feathers, from you, Charlie, putting this word out. Thank you very much for allowing this, and working with Will and everybody that he has an amazing group of people underneath him that make him look really, really good. And so does Auntie Margo. And I want to thank you for allowing me to express how I feel, because this is truly how I feel. This is real. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking us through that. I could hear the genuinity that you have, the passion that you have for this work. So it's my honor to kind of offer all of you this space to kind of to express that, and offer that, and share that contagious energy, because I'm getting jazzed up myself, just in this space. So for folks to kind of use this as as an inspiration, I think is exactly what we're thriving to do. And we're talking a lot about like the barrier or the disruptions historically, and I know that it went from the life and safety of ourselves and our people. And I think even more contemporarily, there's that barrier that still exists, except for it's more systematic. There's more hoops and bureaucratical red tape that kind of is used as that same type of idea. So that's kind of our next question is like, what are the barriers? I know Will had mentioned how many different hoops and how many things to do it by the book you have to do to make sure like you're not jeopardizing everything that you're trying to accomplish. So I wanted to kind of shed light on that process. And then you got Margo, who was like, we just got to volunteer. I just told them there's going to be some deer meat sandwiches, and food, people will follow food. So there's that diversity as far as like what you got to do to make sure that fire's back on the ground. So I think this will be a good question to pose.
I guess I'll take a stab at that. I posted the link to that Good Fire paper in the chat. So I strongly recommend folks take a peek at that, because I think it just lays it out really, really clean and bare, what the work ahead of us here. One of the big things we have right now is liability. Pretty much all of the NGOs and private contractors in California lost their burn insurance in the past 2 years, including MCWIC. And so, luckily we have connections through our tribal fire departments to the federal system, where they can still get coverage, liability coverage through the BIA and the Department of Interior. But unfortunately, right at the time when we need to be expanding the use of fire, the insurance industry, because of recent losses from wildfires, just simply won't insure us to burn. And so I've been trying for the last 2 years to find an answer to that problem, and have been unsuccessful. But luckily right now we're working with the insurance commissioner of California, David Jones, to figure out, how we can, add resources from the state or federal agencies to the private insurance market to make them come back to that market so they can offer policies for groups like MCWIC and CFMC and all the other groups that are wanting to get into to prescribe fire. I think really what it comes down to too is just, our modern lives are so busy that, the burn windows come when they come. And we've got, schedules that are chock full of this and that. And until we're to the point where fire comes first, to where whatever it was we had on our schedule, we don't do that. And we go out and we burn together. That's when we will have arrived, and that's kind of our goal. We used to do a 2-week treks and put all our eggs in that basket. And then half the time it'd be raining. So we'd have 100 firefighters here, fire lighters, ready to do good work. And we're, inside doing trainings because it's raining. And so really in more recent years, we've been focusing on this all hands, all lands approach and family-based burning, where it's like, hey, who do we got that's ready to get out and get some fire on the ground when that window shows up in February or March or June or September, or, any of those windows we have that, we're not taking advantage of. And I'm super inspired because, yesterday I was up in Happy Camp meeting with the Happy Camp Volunteer Fire Department, and they're tired of waiting. They don't want to see the other half of the town of Happy Camp burn up. And they're taking fire into their own hands right now, and they're planning burns left and right and pulling permits, and and they're like, hey, if you want to come up and burn with us, come up, but one way or the other, we're getting fire on the ground. And so I think the reality is, so a lot of us are getting touched by fire in such a traumatic and fundamental way that we are making the time, that we are making the space to get good fire on the ground when the fire is telling us it's the right time to get it on the ground.
I love that. It could have been a really complex kind of answer, like, oh, you got to go to this and get this kind of certification. But it really, what I heard was sometimes it just comes down to a matter of like that people power, like how many hands are on deck ready to go when the opportunity is granted. And, and unfortunately it is like, you got to react to like a catastrophic event to realize this is no joke. Like, this isn't something we can continue to kind of put in the back burner. Otherwise it's going to be too late. And then what, so I like that, how it just like really comes down to like the commitment and, the sacrifice of this modern life, like it's tough, it's tough to manage and kind of live that, but it does come down to just like that, like the mass, like the community, just like prioritizing that. So I like that response. Now let's hear from Margo's experience with her kind of, volunteer people power approach herself.
So I think one of the bigger barriers to putting fire on the ground, or a driving force behind it, is people's fear of fire. We've had it hammered into us for 120 years. What is that? 5-6 generations. That fire is bad, that fire is scary, that we must put it out at all costs. And it's hard to overcome that fear for people who have not only had that message delivered to them on so many different fronts, but also see on the news these wildfires raging out of control, who may have personally experienced wildfire. And when we are trying to return fire in a good way, and we are working with agencies who are used to only putting fires out, it's hard to get them to understand that you can use fire and keep it under control. That is possible. and that it is critically important to the ecosystem to make that happen. And so often when we have our big Trex burns, the training exchange we have included in those people who come to participate is CAL FIRE sometimes, and also the US Forest Service. And they're the ones in charge of putting the fires out. So they're like come in and like learning how to manage fire, to put it on the ground in a safe way, to keep it contained in the area that you want. And really it takes that personal interaction and being part of that group who is using fire in a purposeful way to overcome that fear. We had some people from the media come up, The Guardian, and they had covered these wildfires, but they had heard that we was doing something different, and they wanted to come get the story, and they were scared. They didn't know what they was gonna be entering into, and they said it was such a shock to them that when they came, and they was right there on the fire lines with us, that nobody was afraid. Nobody was running. Nobody had fear on our faces. In fact, when there's the occasional flare up, we're like, oh, whoa, look at that, and that it's all under control. And the people driving by on the road, they're honking and they're clapping and they're saying, yeah, yeah. And so nobody in our community has that fear like the general community at large because of the wildfires. But because of the wildfires, they are starting to realize the necessity of prescribed burns because it helps to prevent wildfires. Now, when we're burning, we're not, we get money from fire prevention, from CAL FIRE, but what our purpose is to restore the land using fire, and wildfire prevention is a byproduct of that. I don't put it in exactly those words when we're, going after a grant for fire prevention. But when you're burning the hillsides, you're reducing the fuel, and when you reduce the fuel, you reduce the spread and intensity of wildfire. The other thing that I think has been a barrier for a lot of people, not so much us, because in our area, everybody wants their land burned. Nobody cares about the smoke. It ain't there that long anyway. But there are really stringent smoke guidelines you have to go by. And some people, after experiencing weeks and weeks and weeks of wildfire smoke, they don't want to have any more smoke from prescribed burns. And what they need to realize is that there is no such alternative as a no smoke option, that they will either have toxic smoke for weeks on end from wildfire, or they will have the minimal amount of smoke from prescribed burns that comes strictly from wood, no toxic smoke. And that it is a minimal amount, especially compared to wildfire. So until people really take a hold of that and it sinks in, then it continues to be a huge barrier for some people, especially if you're trying to burn in grape country, which we're not. But I know Will and them are affected by that at times with the grape growers up there. I said if those people were smart, they would market a special product, smoked grape wine.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, I think less because of our prescribed burns and more because of wildfire smoke. A lot of our local winemakers are switching to white grapes because they don't get tainted by the smoke as much as the red grapes. So they're having to evolve too if they want to stay in business up here, learn and adapt.
Right.
I really like that you kind of finished, Margo, that you finished on like the, no matter what, there's going to be smoke. You can't mute smoke, like that's going to happen, whether that's wood, like your fire stove, or whether that's, a family burn. But for sure, like when you have a massive watershed kind of fire, that's unavoidable too. So it's like you kind of gotta take it for like in the bits rather than like a big kind of blow up cloud. And I'm also thinking about like, you know, the nature, you know, the poofage, the deer, you know, like the bears, like how are they supposed to know that fire's coming if they're not used to the smell of smoke or knowing like those kind of natural cues of like we need to get out of here? Because if there's not a lot of fire like routinely, you know, that new generation may not know like, oh, that's a sign of like danger, like we need to leave rather before it's too late. So like just thinking like that could be another kind of reason why it's important to have that routine of like, you know, smaller safer burns is so that they know like, oh yeah, that's danger, like that's what it smells like. So, you know, it could help them kind of be more successful and sustainable in their own right. So that's what I like to think about too. How about you, Rick? What kind of barriers do you come across on the ground as far as implementing fire like the way that you would like?
Um, well, as of lately, things have gotten really good. We now have a budget to work with. We got the tools that we need. We got the people. We got the resources. The biggest, I guess, obstacle that I see is, as Will said, is our burn windows and the opportunity to strike in the optimum time. Because, you know, in the fall, we get to burn after about a half an inch of rain, and that, you know, usually slows us down quite a bit. In the spring, you know, we have a lot of small windows that open up that we need to have, you know, spaces ready to go, whether it be piles or you know, a family burn or you know, smaller broadcasts for cultural resources. But to be able to get into our units that are prepped and ready to go and solid and outside the federal burn windows would be great, you know, to have an opportunity to open up different types of permits to allow us to burn in, say, August or maybe early September. You know, that would actually help us out quite a bit because, you know, looking at it now, we got a pretty good ground record of holding, you know, our fires. We got the resources of people that are trained up fully in fighting and lighting and, you know, holding fire in the Klamath drainage, which, you know, as we all know, is one of the most dangerous places to be using fire. Which I think is the reason why we used to use it so much, you know, because it is so dangerous. And like you said, the smoke, it's on whose, you know, choice are we going to have it on ours? Or if we let mother do it, we're not going to like it. She's going to do it big, you know? But yeah, to be able to get in these other windows, I think for what we're doing is one of the biggest obstacles that we have to mitigate and or, you know, navigate.
Yeah, I hear that. You know, I think that's the biggest thing is just navigating the time and, you know, the effectiveness of each time because it's pretty sensitive. You know, I think it's important to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, you know, in that way. And so like, you know, a lot of the things, the discussion points that we've been talking about kind of about like the process of how to kind of get things mobilized and get things going and like getting fire on the ground. And so kind of like before we have some questions from the audience, so I appreciate that engagement. But before we get to those questions, we're going to spend some time kind of getting to the fruits of like all this work, the fruits of the labor and dedication that you all have demonstrated for some time now. And the question being, how do you see rekindling relationships to fire connected with food sovereignty and holistic health?
Do you want me to go? You know, I mean, I just think of, you know, where do you go hunting for deer? You know, you go into the recent burn. You know, where do the salmon spawn? It's where there's good gravel because recent wildfires or prescribed fires, you know, input that right size gravel into the streams. And so, you know, fire I think is the driver of our food abundance, you know, and the harvestable surplus of food in this country. And the nearest I could, you know, reconstruct through, you know, places where I've seen frequent fires overlapping just by chance, you know, just to get an idea of that, less than 0.1% of our landscape has 6 overlapping fires in the past 120 years. And so historically, on average, you might see 20 to 30 fire overlaps on any given chunk of ground as an average on most of our ground. So, you know, to think about that, you know, fire was passing over any given point, you know, under that tree that Rick was talking about, those stories being told, you know, think about that with the feeling of that forest. And the clearest feel, you know, what we get is, you know, there were old growth legacy trees of all species scattered across the landscape, and the forest canopy wasn't so choked that no sun hit the ground. So, you know, it was more like 30 to 60% canopy. So that sun was hitting the ground, and all those berries and all those herbs and medicine plants and everything was getting the energy from the sun and turning around and giving that to the people. And the people were creating those spaces with fire at the right time in the right place. And so, you know, what I see is that, you know, that's how we get to a harvestable surplus of resources. You know, we could have 10 times more elk, 10 times more salmon, 10 times more deer to feed the people here, and to make us less dependent on outside resources being trucked in on semis. So, you know, some of the things that we've done through the Western Climate Restoration Partnership are food grove assessments. So while we're looking at projects like the Somes Bar Integrated Fire Management Project, was like, you know, 5,600 acres just north of Somes Bar, you know, tying in our most at-risk mid-slope properties, and restoring fire process after 120 years of fire exclusion. We're going in there first and looking for where those food groves are and what kind of treatments and what kind of specific type of fire needs to happen in those places to benefit those resources. So I, you know, similar to what Margo said, you know, that may not be what the funding's for. A lot of times it's for, you know, fire prevention and protecting homes, but there is a way to use those resources to restore cultural resources in this place. And I think, you know, we're showing how it's done, and those models are traveling across the country and worldwide.
Thank you, Will. That was brilliantly said, you know, just as far as like, you know, obviously you're going to go hunting in those well-maintained, well-burned spaces, and, you know, the fish are going to spawn where there's a healthy amount, a balanced amount of gravel. And so those are things there. You also are talking about how important that is for like the social fabric, you know, the social fabric of the people, the community, and just like how rejuvenating that is on a spiritual sense. You know, like if you have access to those foods, like you're gonna feel really good about yourself. You're gonna pass on that good energy to your kids and, you know, next generations, to where then they're gonna be like, I remember when, you know, my uncle showed me this, and now I feel like it's my responsibility. So there's that intergenerational teaching that comes with it. And so that's kind of what I like about, what I love about, you know, our culture is like everything, like food is that, you know, food is the fabric, because that you gotta, you know, feed yourself, you gotta feed your body, but your spirit too. You know, I think that's what comes with, you know, fire, because fire is the tool that makes sure that's of access and of sustenance. So I really liked what you had to say there, and looking forward to what Margo and Rick have to say as well. Margo, I think you're next on line.
So I think as when I think about rekindling relationships to fire connected to food and holistic health, my mind automatically goes to the next generations of people that will carry on the work that we've started. I work with the school district, and so it's a natural connection for me to tie kids in with the work that we're doing with fire. And so we bring kids on field trips to to the cultural burns that we do, explaining why it's important to do the burns and how to do them safely, and tying in that whole food sovereignty piece, you know, that when you burn under the tan oak trees, it produces a healthy crop of acorns instead of ones riddled with bugs. I believe that restoring the prairies is a critical piece of strengthening our food sovereignty. Our prairies are only about 3% of what they once were. We used to have elk in our homelands, but now we don't have any. Well, actually, there's been a couple seen since we started to burn. But those prairies, they produce a food source for animals and humans. There's grains that grow there that traditionally we would be harvesting. There's wild potatoes that we would be digging. And so as we start to reclaim those food sources, I have been bringing them into the school system so that they can learn about them in the school setting and their planter boxes in the schools. And then that way, when they go out and are walking around in the mountains, they'll recognize, oh yeah, that's a native grass. We can use that for food. Oh yeah, there's wild potatoes. When they flower, we can start digging them. And so I those are the lines that I think of when I think of perpetuating these relationships and securing our food for long term, so that we're not dependent on the grocery store, because as the pandemic has taught us, we can't depend on them, because sometimes their shelves are empty, but the forest is always full, and the bit more we take care of it, the more it will provide.
Thank you for that. That's rich. You took me on a little journey there, walking in the prairies looking for some flowering potatoes. You know, that's critical, you know, especially if you're just hiking out there, you know, sometimes like, man, I need that burst, you know, and sometimes chewing on that potato is just like, just get you home, you know. And you know, we could get to the point where you don't need to rush back, or you don't have to bring a lunch, you know, like you're already going somewhere where you'll get much more than, you know, the nutritional satisfaction, you know. So thank you for taking us on that journey. And I'd like to hear what Rick has to say in this, as far as rekindling relationship and how that's connected to food sovereignty and holistic health.
Are you on mute, Rick?
Sorry about that. The more I think about it, the more this like conversation really blows my mind, because it's like the more I learn about what I'm doing, that I realize how little I actually really know, and how everything is so connected in the symbiosis of our whole land, our landscape. You know, the prairies, let's talk about those for a second. You know, those grass roots from our prairies, they go down like 11 feet into the ground, you know, and after 100 years of no fire, they're still there. And as we go and we start to burn off that top layer and let some sunshine and pure water in there, they're going to start coming back and growing. And I know this because I've seen it. And just being out there, because when we go out to a unit, I'm usually the first one in, and then I go through and I look and kind of see what's there and what it used to be, and you know, the work that we have to do to get it back. And you know, it gives me a time to reconnect with the land, to like let my guard down, to be susceptible to the old stories and the spirits that are still there, you know, to kind of get an understanding of, you know, what kind of work we need to put in. And that's kind of like I was talking about the older science, and to me that's what it is like being susceptible to the spirits of your ancestors, or the people that used to be there, and the spirits of the animals, and you know, even those trees, and every plant out there is a spirit that we're all connected to on such a higher level. and keeping that in mind, I like to take that time when I'm out on the fire lines with people and transfer knowledge and see what they got to share with us. Because, in every event that I've been to, there's usually people I haven't talked to so much. And so we can share and transfer knowledge. And for us to transfer knowledge on a multi-generational, basis is huge. And getting it into the curriculum and seeing the ladies walking out on the fire line with their babies, and with that look of awe and just like that smile, that it's about time kind of look, that's fuel for my fire, my inner fire. That keeps me going, that keeps me warm, and to be able to project out in the same kind of way, it is an honor and a privilege to be in the space that I'm occupying right now, and trying to do as much good as possible and learn what I can, and the concept of our native knowledge and the Western science knowledge it's so different because, we have to quantify what we know is right in science, models that could make the Western science say, oh yeah, well, that's why that works. But it's like looking at the wall and just like focusing on one nail, you're not seeing the wall for a wall. You're trying to figure out what good is that one nail doing. So, it's hard to quantify without having people actually there to experience and to get that feeling and that sound of the fire and the smell of the smoke and how everybody's just so positive and the directions that we're going, and also taking safety into a very high priority. That's the highest priority because nothing out there is worth anybody getting hurt. And the foods and the resources and just seeing how many different species of animals come in after a burn, and even the birds come in while we're burning to hammer on the trees and get the bugs. It's really very cool. And it just seems so natural how it comes about and how it works once everybody's got those pregame jitters out and we can just, move along at our leisure and accomplish our goals. And the end result, it's just beautiful. It's really hard to explain. You should come out to a burn with us, Charlie.
Oh yeah, I have to, especially this conversation, it sounds like there's a lot that you're going to learn just from the experience, like you're saying, the words can never, accurately depict kind of the feelings that you must get out there. You're taking me on another journey here, just imagining some, strong women with their babies, like this is what it's all about right here with no fear whatsoever. Instead, just that satisfaction of doing what that your ancestors have done forever. So I appreciate that invite and kind of bringing it back. And I would just want to take this time too to thank each and every one of you for offering your personal experiences and wisdom around the topic, because I always get jazzed up about it. And I think this is something that will inspire so many people just from one sit down. Imagine if this is more regular. It wasn't just a meeting that you get inspired, but it's that day to day, like what Will's saying, like when as soon as we put fire first, then this doesn't have to happen as often, or it doesn't have to be so profound as much as it is. It's just like you kind of want to practice it a little bit more, so that it's just more normal. And so I think we're kind of wrapping it up, and I definitely want to respect everyone's timetable here. We have about 13 minutes left, and there are some really good questions, so we'll try to get through them in a convenient enough time to kind of leave space to segue into kind of the next episode of this fire series. And the first question I think is good for Will, just because he touched on it a little bit, so we'll start there. Can you talk about what fire does to help the water?
Yeah, well, there's no way to cover that in a short amount of time because it is so profound, but I will touch on a few things that have really opened my eyes. And Rick talked about the, the charcoal filter effect of, burn landscapes that get rained on is much healthier for the rivers. And that's a huge aspect. And then likewise, when you have that steady supply of charcoal going into our rivers and our floods, and it gets deposited onto our river bars, that's biochar. And when we look at our big riparian trees, those 8-foot DBH Doug fir that grew out of that fertile soil with the biochar from the floods and the silt and the charcoal. When that 8-foot tree falls over a diagonal to the channel, all of a sudden, you created an underground reservoir of water behind that. And so there's that, synergy between, the fires helping to grow the big trees when they fall down, trapping the water, widening our floodplains, making habitat for juvenile coho and chinook, inviting the beavers to come back in, and then the beavers do more damming. And then you've got a wet area in the bottom of our stream channels that can stop fires. And so there's this reciprocal relationship. A couple other things, just briefly, one thing that we're working on in the Upper Klamath right now is that without fire in the willows, it becomes kind of a natural riprap where, it anchors into the sides of the channel. And if you don't have big floods, it can't wash out those willows, and it racks sticks, and then the stream just incisors down. And so even when you have flood events, you're never connecting the floodplain, and so all the juvenile fish will die. So fire in the willows is super important. And then finally, the connection between smoke and river temperatures. I remember in 2013, we basically lost 300 of our 700 spring chinook in the Salmon River that year due to high temperatures, because there's too many straws out there sucking water from all those drainages. And because of those big fires that fill up the pools with sediment, and so there's no deep holes that will stratify. But then, as fate would have it, in 2013, what they call an arsonist drove up the Salmon River and lit a bunch of fires, which later became the Butler Fire and the Salmon Complex. And those fires shaded out the sun and dropped the river temperature by about 5 to 6 degrees. And the fish stopped dying. They were literally jumping out of the river onto the rocks at the mouths of creeks like Crapo. And once that fire happened, it cooled down the river, and we held on to those remaining 400 fish. So Frank Lake and Elias Sarian and Aaron David did a great paper on that, which, speaking to Rick's point, it's a labor of love to convert traditional knowledge into Western science so that a different group of people will hear it. But we do have a lot of great folks out there that are doing just that.
Thanks, Will, for covering a lot of ground in such a short time period. I appreciate, talking about that, because those are things that I like to remember, just the imagery that you offered us was perfect for this time. And so the next question I think is good for Margo. And then after that, we'll have a question that was specific for Rick as well. So I like how evenly distributed. So we're getting most of the questions that have been asked. So it says, what happens to our relationship with fire when we only think of one aspect of fire? Maybe we only think of the danger. What happens to our own balance? And I think that was from Lucinda Myers. So if you want, I could repeat that, or go ahead.
So what happens to fire when we only consider one aspect of it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens is the situation that we're in today, where fire is excluded from the land and the land is overgrown with brush. It's like a hoarder's house. It's no longer functional. So like many things, fire is a many-faceted thing, that fire is a spirit, and we need to think of it in that way. An elder taught me that. I said that fire has a spirit, and she said, no, fire is a spirit. And that the spirit of the fire has the ability to to connect us to so many facets of life. And that if you're only looking at it in one way, you are really missing the boat.
Thank you, Margo. That was well said and effectively said too. So the third and final question, I also want to say, like, if either of you had to get off when I'm going through like the logistics of kind of next, what to expect next, I just want to thank you in advance in case that's necessary for you all. Just want to keep in mind the time again. And this one's for Rick. It says, can Rick talk more about what he called the old science of fire?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, with our first agreement with our creator to be where we're at and to live well and to have our medicines and foods is to keep our land tended. And Auntie told us the story of fire and how it was stolen from the above and brought down to here, and then with the teachings of when to apply, keeps us in balance. And we're not trying to get rid of things, and because some things have their places in our landscapes. We have our gathering trees and our berries, and the prairies for our tubers and forbs and stuff. And the knowledge of when to burn was, I think, is really the old science. It's been handed through and has actually been a challenge to to find, because there's so few people who actually have continued the practice of applying fire to the land, with the threat of incarceration and or shootings or hangings. But it brings me to like this passage I read in a book, to where that we all have this knowledge and that it's ingrained upon us, and then upon when we need it, it becomes unlocked and available to us. And this is like knowledge from thousands of years ago that I think is imprinted in our DNA. And like sometimes things and it's right, but you've never been taught that, but I would try to like, kind of say that that's the same thing, and I'm kind of a believer in it, but I just don't go out and try things that I don't talk about with other people, so that I make sure that I'm trying to do the right thing. But it's, maybe it's the lack of the, higher learning that makes it so I don't overthink these things. But that's kind of, we just know it's right. And there's nothing that's been written or nothing that's in the books that say it is, but we know it is. And that's our old science.
Thank you for going into that depth. I think it was really powerful note to kind of bring back in. Margo, did you want to add?
Oh, I just wanted to say that it's actually called epigenetics. It's written in our DNA, the memories of our ancestors.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a powerful word. And so yeah, if anyone has any final thoughts, we do have about 3 minutes if anyone wants to have any last words. So yeah, I guess I'll open the mic here in that case.
Well, I would just like to say that I'm really happy to be able to be on here with all of you guys. This has really been a privilege to be able to share. And, my vision for the future is that we will all be burning together, all ages of people, families, nonprofits, for-profits, government agencies, it. We all have the knowledge to burn, and we're all using that knowledge to restore the land.
I would like to add a little word. We also have an Indigenous Peoples Burn Network that the Hoopa, York, and Karooks and all of us got together and kind of threw together some knowledge. It's to help all Indigenous people reclaim their right to use fire as a land management tool. And there's some great information and ways to navigate obstacles and such. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I just want to say, hey, hats off to you, Charlie. I've seen you since you're little one, and you grew up straight and tall and strong, and you're really what inspires me. You know, stepping into leadership, making things happen. You know, burning with your brothers has been a real joy of mine. So I look forward to seeing you on the hillside sometime, because you know we can do it all. We can bring back the fish, we can bring back the fire, restore our communities. You know, it all goes together, and I see you doing it. So thank you.
Thank you all for such an inspiring and open and inviting conversation. You know, I think that's what I was most looking forward to with this panel and this series in general, just knowing the good-hearted people that comes with it, right? Like that's what we're talking about, just how inspiring and motivating and how great of a tool this fire stuff is, because it's not just a management tool, but it's also like it uplifts you to be the best person that you can be to take care of our natural world. So thank you all. And you know, I'm actually surprised that we're able to kind of keep it in within our time frame. I think that's worthy of a round of applause in itself. So thank you all for sticking with me. And I guess now I'll take the time to kind of talk about a little bit of housekeeping on what to kind of look forward to in the coming weeks. I know Margo has been an awesome kind of advisor to this type of project that we're doing. And on April 2nd, we're going to bring in the youth. So I think that's going to be a really fun time and uplifting time to hear, you know, center the youth voices. And so that's going to be a part of like the curriculum of fire. So I think that'll be awesome. We're going to have some special content. So I hope to see you all April 2nd, and kind of be on the lookout for flyers. We haven't nailed down a time, but April 2nd is the date as of now. So thank you all for tagging along with us today. And as always, you know, these videos are going to be posted to our Two Feathers NAFS YouTube page for, you know, anytime if you missed a part of it, you know, it's there for access. It could even be used as a tool for any other kind of spaces that you see applicable. So thank you all for joining, and see you next time. All righty, I think we're all off. So thanks again, Margo.